the COP23. Okay, please welcome. Yeah.
Welcome, Prime Minister.
So, my deputy as president.
Gola.
The housing. So, housing.
Yes.
His Excellency, the Prime Minister of Fiji, Mr. Frank Bainimarama, His Excellency, the President of the United Nations Habitat Assembly, Madam Mata Delgado Peralta, Excellency, the Chief Secretary, Transport and Infrastructure of the Republic of Kenya, Mr. James Macharia, His Excellency, the Vice Minister of Environment and Urbanization of the Republic of Turkey, Professor Dr. Mehmet Emar Bilpinar, and distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening. Welcome to the first UN Habitat Assembly, which represents an important turning point for UN Habitat.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to kick off this roundtable on infrastructure, cities and local action, ICLA, at the first ever UN Habitat Assembly. As we look ahead to the UN Secretary General's Climate Action Summit in September, today's ministerial gathering represents a critical opportunity to spur a global reimagining of how our cities and infrastructure networks can power sustainable development. An unprecedented rise in rural to urban drift is being fueled by the search of new opportunity and the certainty of reliable services and infrastructure. As governments, we can certainly stem that rising tide by leveling the playing field across rural and urban regions. But we still must confront the reality that the population of our urban areas will continue to massively expand. We must ask ourselves, how can our cities adapt? How can we ensure growing urban populations have access to clean water, other essential services, and decent, affordable housing, of course? How we deal with the resulting increases in waste and pollution? How do we protect our environment from the strains of urbanization? And the question of paramount importance, how do we guarantee our cities develop in a sustainable manner? The answers to these questions, Your Excellencies, are made far more urgent and complex by the scale and ferocity of climate-related impacts, which both accelerate the rate of urban drift and exacerbate the cost on our economies. Prolonged droughts, rising soil salinity levels, and severe weather events are forcing rural populations to seek the relative safety and economic security of urban environments. But the impacts aren't limited to rural regions. Many cities themselves face deep vulnerabilities to rising seas, the worsening floods, and other devastating climate impacts. Our cities are at crossroads. They must either evolve into models of resilience or crumble into continuous source of climate crisis. In Fiji, Your Excellencies, we're thinking seriously about how our cities, our towns, and our rural communities must adapt in the face of a changing climate. We've already embarked on an urban planning initiative with the Singaporean government that is placing low emissions and climate resilient strategies at the heart of our urban development agenda. We've undertaken a comprehensive climate vulnerability assessment across our economy that considers the potential climate impacts over the coming decades. That assessment has placed US $4.5 billion value on the resources, technologies, and expertise we need to adapt the Fijian economy over a 10-year period. That, Your Excellency, is nearly the value of our entire GDP. Whether it's in the Pacific, Asia, Europe, or here in Africa, the cost of adaptation are similarly staggering. But we know the cost of inaction are far greater. Many vulnerable economies are only one severe weather event away from complete decimation. We need new financing mechanisms and new technologies to mitigate that risk. But we also need a new recognition of the opportunities in the adaptation space. No nation and no economy will be spared from worsening climate impacts. Those leading the way in funding and implementing adaptation solutions will reap the benefits of that body of knowledge and experiences in the decades to come. But our efforts, Your Excellencies, to build resilience must be matched with decisive cuts in global carbon emissions. That is very important. Otherwise, climate impacts will intensify to a scale beyond any nation's ability to manage. Fiji and the Marshall Islands were the first two nations to commit to raising the ambition of our NDCs by 2020 and reaching net zero emissions by mid-century. That is a commitment every nation on earth, particularly every major economy, must emulate. Presently, our collective global commitments fall badly short of where they need to be, placing our planet on track for 3 degrees Celsius of warming above pre-industrial levels. That, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, is a nightmare scenario that we cannot allow to unfold. Urban areas account for nearly 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That is where the most decisive cuts can and must be made. And I've been inspired by the many cities that are already stepping up their own commitments, turning urban environments along the most significant sources of harmful emissions into greener, more inclusive, and more resilient local economies. Organizations like the C40 cities and R20, led by my friend and fellow climate champion Arnold Schwarzenegger, are rallying sub-national governments to deliver sustainable infrastructure and lead the government toward decarbonization. We need that same level of commitment shared throughout all levels of society, from ordinary citizens to business leaders to world leadership. The sustainability of cities, towns, and communities of the future will be determined by the strengths of those commitments today. Let the weight of the enormous responsibility inspire us with conviction throughout our discussions, both at this Assembly and beyond. And I thank you all.
Thank you, His Excellency Prime Minister, for your powerful and aspiring statement.